My name is John Passfield, and I'm going to read from my novel, Cyril Passfield Out West, a novel by John Passfield. And this is the cover. And the novel is based on an actual incident, an actual event. In the summer of 1932, my father, who was 23 years old, and his friend Charlie went out west to find work. And this was during the Depression, the Great Depression in 1930. So this is an actual photograph, and my father is on your right here and blowing on a fire. Charlie, his friend who went out with him, also 23 years old, is on your left. There's some railroad ties in the background, and it comes from a larger snapshot which showed a railroad train up on the hill there. So it's nice to have an actual action photo uh, taken during the time of the events. I'll just read the summary from the back cover, and I'm going to read sort of the action story, the events of the trip out west during that summer, during the Great Depression, uh, in a moment. Here's the summary from the back cover. In June 1932, in the depths of the Great Depression, two part-time railway workers, 23-year-old Cyril Passfield, that's my dad, and his friend Charlie Thompson, decide to leave their hometown, St. Thomas, Ontario. They go on the hobo, joining the great army of the unemployed who are riding the trains back and forth across Canada. As they travel west, they hope to get work in the harvest, or maybe hop a freighter in Vancouver and see the world. The novel is based on Cyril Passfield's diary of the summer of 1932. Well, before I start reading from the text of the novel, I'll mention that actually there are three uh, printed sources that I was able to work from. My dad died a long time ago, so I wasn't able to talk to him at the time of writing. But I'll just go through these three sources, and you'll get a sense of where the novel uh, came from in terms of information. Um, my dad kept a diary that summer. It was about 5 months. They left St. Thomas, Ontario. They took the CPR out west, and he kept a daily diary. And when I was a boy, I was 12 or 13, my dad sat down, my brother, my sister, myself, my mom, and he read from the diary. And as he read, he turned the pencil diary into ink, and he told us stories. And never thought about recording it, and didn't. So I have memories of what he said. But after he died, there was the diary, and he hadn't added a word or changed a word. He just turned every penciled note into ink. Now, when my dad got older, he had retired at 65. He was 68. And I said to him, Dad, you've had a very interesting life. Would you like to write a kind of a memoir just of things that have happened in your life? Well, he wrote about 6 pages. And I thought, no, there's a lot more than that. So I made up a list of 20, 30, maybe 40 questions by the time we were done. We did different sessions. I took the big old reel-to-reel tape recorder home. I was away from home and had a wife and 3 kids at the time. And I asked him all these questions. What was your job? What was your first job? How many jobs did you have as a teenager? What were your various jobs on the railway as you worked your way up? What about that summer of 1932? Why did you go out there and what happened and so on? But his whole life. So I had a tape recording which I later turned into print. And then after my dad died, he died at 72, young. I'm 75 right now. A fellow came to his funeral, and it was Charlie Thompson, the fellow my dad had gone out west with. Well, I sent the diary, printed version, typed version, to Charlie, and he said every line is like a paragraph. Every paragraph is like a page. I thought, wow. Excuse me. So I took the big reel-to-reel tape recorder back to my hometown and taped Charlie. And it was fascinating. You talk about time travel. Here it is. It was 54 years after Charlie had gone out west with my dad. He would tell stories, and I could tell him what day that event had happened. Other times I would read an event, and he would say, oh, I'd forgotten that. And 54 years later, he could fill in detail of that event. So there we are. I had these three sources, and later when I became a novelist and had written a number of novels, I thought, wow, I could write a novel about my dad. I could write a novel of my dad's trip to the West. That would be the shape of the novel. So I had the diary, I had the interview with my dad, only one section of which elaborates on the trip to the West, and I had the interview with Charlie, the fellow who had accompanied my dad. So the novel is 17 chapters. I'm calling this video actually Hobo, Cowboy, Farmhand. And so they get on the CPR at Toronto. They go north of Superior and out west. They're hobos. If you've seen, I'm sure you have, photos and films of people clinging to boxcars and riding on top of boxcars during the 1930s. Any one of those photos could have my dad and Charlie, because that's what they did. So they were hobos. They went out to Vancouver, and you'll see a bit of this when I read from the novel. No work. So hobos, okay. A friend had worked on a farm with him in St. Thomas and was homesteading in northern Alberta. So they went up there. Well, they were cowboys in northern Alberta. Well, that was great. It was hard work, but it was enjoyable. But he couldn't afford to pay them. So they stayed there for a while. And then they went down to southern Saskatchewan where they became farmhands. And that was great because they were now being paid. $2 a day was good money at the time, but very, very hard work. And then finally, after being hobos, cowboys, and farmhands, they were hobos again on the way back riding the CPR. So that's the story as it runs through the 17 chapters. Now, each chapter has what I call 8 segments of action. That's the story, going out west, working, and so on, and then coming home. But if you take 8 segments and you split them, then between those segments, there are 7 segments, which I fill with thought. Because my theory of the way we live our lives is we move through the day very, very conscious of what we're actually doing, in this case, being a hobo, being a cowboy, being a farmhand. But we kind of review everything in our lives, everything that's current in our lives, everything that's past in our lives. We're just kind of thinking of what life is all about. And so uh, that's not what I'm going to read from today, but that's how the chapters are made up. What I'm actually going to read from today are segments of the action story. And now I'll read from the text of the novel. There's 8 segments of action in each chapter, as I said. Well, to keep the video within a reasonable length, I just want to give the flavor of the novel. I'm only going to read 2 of these action segments from each chapter, and I'm not going to read from every chapter. And as I go along, I'll indicate page numbers. Possibly you might have a copy of the book and you could follow along. But if not, no harm done. So the book actually starts on chapter 1, obviously, but it starts on page 3. So here's the very first action moment, excuse my voice, in the novel. Swimming with Charlie at Pinafore Park, shaking the water off as we stand beside the dock, lying on the grass across the pond from the ice cream pavilion, and talking. How neither of us is getting much time on the railroad. Even if somebody's sick, there's a whole whack of guys they call in first before they call us. It's seniority. And with the way things are going with this economy, it's going to be a lot less work if they have another round of layoffs again. Talking about the old ice house. Used to be lots of work over there when we were kids. So what do you think we ought to do to get some work? And now I'll just glance at my notes from time to time because I need these page numbers that I've selected. Let's leave out a lot of action as well as thought, and go to page 9. Hopping a freight at the top of the yards. Lots of railroad police around. They carry these rubber truncheons and they swing 'em hard. Charlie and me sneaking between the boxcars, racing to an empty and scrambling inside. Finally, she starts to move, picking up speed as she rolls along. Nice to see the fields go by, farmland giving way to rock, heading north out of Toronto. On our way right across Canada, Northern Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. Me and Charlie huddling down, collars up from the cold morning air. Have to shout to make each other heard. We'll go right out to the coast, sleep on a bench in Stanley Park, hop a freighter, we'll be off to see the world. Well, we'll see whether that happens. That was chapter 1. I'm going to skip to chapter 3 now, and it's page 20. Again, leaving out a lot, but picking certain items to give the flavor. Page 20. Sleeping in boxcars, on the ground, in train stations, and in jails, on locomotives, in the caboose, and on cars of coal. Talking to the trainmen about our jobs, how Eastern trains are different from Western trains. Brakemen, switchmen, oilers, conductors, telling them carpentry work is my favorite. Fixing everything made of wood in the stations and the yards. A brotherhood of trainmen, being invited into the cabooses, many insisting we sleep in their beds, cooking us meals and giving us tickets to ride on the trains. Well, it's a depression story. We all have a kind of an idea of what it was like to be a hobo riding on the trains and so on. But my dad and Charlie were railway workers. Railway is British and Canadian. Railroad is American. Uh, and so they took their duds along, their railway overalls and hats and neckerchiefs and so on. And so they were well treated by the trainmen, which wasn't true of all the other hobos. And of course, the railway police were charged with keeping them off the trains, but the railway workers weren't unfriendly. And so that's an interesting sidelight. It makes this story a little different from the others. 21, page 21. A lesson in how to stem. Stemming is the art of asking for food. Always offer to do some jobs around the house. Nobody likes to beg, but it isn't really begging, you see. It's offering to work in exchange for food. None of these people is rich, but they try to help. Some got sons on the bum, or just like us. Most people want firewood chopped, or maybe a fence needs a little repair, or something like that. One guy wanted his septic tank cleaned, but I told the guy no thanks. Sandwiches are the best. You can take 'em back to the yards. Whatever you get, you can share with the other guys. When we pool what we get, we all have a hobo feast. So that's another aspect of being on the hobo. Let's go to page 30, which just happens to be in chapter 4. There's another episode of action. The hobo jungle in Vancouver. Going along with the gang to the market to beg for food. Wilted lettuce and spoiled vegetables and whatever we can find. Hauling it all back to the jungle to make a stew. Take a knife and cut out the bad parts. Cooking it all in big pots. Groups of 5 or 10 all gathered at different fires. Doctors, lawyers, teachers. Some in their battered, rumpled suits, adjusting their ties each morning and scouring the city for work. No idea when this will be over. No idea where their families are now. You sent some rent money home. Will they still be there? And then on we go to page 33. Again, just picking certain items and leaving others out. A gray July day in Vancouver. Seagulls circling over the bay, lining up to apply for work on a freighter. Wonder where that one's going over there. Could be anywheres at all. There's ships from these docks goes out all over the world. Anywhere there's water, that's where they goes. There might be horses being shipped, or maybe cattle. We could tend the stock while the sailors sail the ship. Wouldn't it be something for us to work our way to Hong Kong? Once in a while, the whole line shuffles towards the shed. But you gotta get a card, though. If you don't get no card, you ain't going nowhere. Only able-bodied seamen get to go. Well, that shouldn't be so hard. With all these freighters in the docks, they must need hands. All these people coming out of the shed, are they all hired? Well, that was a little optimistic. It was, I sometimes say the height of the Depression, sometimes the bottom of the Depression, right? The nadir of the Depression, same thing, 1932. Not much work and very few people hiring. Let's go to page 35 then, which is chapter 5, Vancouver, still Vancouver. So hobos in BC, then cowboys in Alberta, and farmhands in Saskatchewan. So it does get better in terms of work. But here we are still in Vancouver. Vancouver, Stanley Park again, sleeping on a couple of benches under newspapers. Didn't like sending home for money. That wasn't the original idea at all. We came out here to make some ready cash. We better find some work soon or we'll be going home flat broke. We should have gone straight up to Vermilion. Did Len Yarwood say he had any work in that letter? Everyone says there's work out west. But just take a look around this park. There's hundreds of people get off these trains every day and end up here on these benches. All these guys line up every morning for 1 or 2 jobs. Well, at my dad's funeral, this fellow came up to me and and said, your dad and I were in Vancouver with 17 cents between us. And, oh, hell, you're Mr. Thompson, of course. And so my brother and I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, we sent home for money. Well, that's not, your typical depression story. But they were railway workers. They were part-time railway workers. And they both had families at home. And so they did have some money at home. But, hey, they didn't, they weren't freeloading on their families, that's for sure. And Len Yarwood was a fellow who'd come from England, had worked on a farm in St. Thomas with my dad and Charlie. And then his brother had come out from England, so they went up to northern Alberta, where they homesteaded. They were given, I assume, given by the government some land under certain conditions. And so eventually, in the novel and in the original story, they head up to Len Yarwood's to see if there's work up there. So let's go to page 41. Oh yeah, here's an interesting incident. The train is stopping for water somewhere near Red Deer, as far as we can tell. Dark as can be outside. Just a light bulb on a pole at the end of the yards. Wonder where we can get some food. Let's swing down here and have a look round. Swinging down out of the boxcar and swinging right back up. Oops, lost my place there. Again, okay. What the heck was that noise? Do you know what that sounded like? A big loud ping on the side of the boxcar. Sounds like a bullet whizzing by. We peek around the corner. There's a big old Ford bucking frantically across the tracks, just leaping over the tracks, coming straight at us. We duck back into the corner and lie down flat on the floor. A few more shots and a few more pings on the side of the car. The headlights glare inside the boxcar. The car goes roaring by. We lie still and things are awful quiet for a while. Then a lurch and the train starts moving. We stay down in the corner and listen as the train moves through the yards, moving slowly and picking up speed, the both of us keeping well away from the door. So, an interesting incident, eh? Kind of putting flesh on the bones of those videos of people clinging to boxcars. This is the kind of thing that can happen. Moving on, chapter 7. I'm skipping chapter 6, but that's fine. Some interesting things in all these chapters. Page 51. Again, heading out of British Columbia and looking for work in Alberta. A dance at the Palliser Hotel. Me and Charlie getting spruced up and going downtown. Can't believe how big an affair. All the streets roped off for blocks. Wax on the streets to make them slippery. Shaking soap powder out of a box so we can dance. 1,500 people dancing, pouring in and out of the lobby. Non-stop music with rotating bands. Over $1 million to build it. 11 stories high. The most luxurious of all the hotels in the West. A bet with Charlie as to who can dance the most times. And then page 55. Again, leaving out some items, but here we are. Vermilion, the train station. Thought we'd never arrive alive. Local freight going 35 miles an hour. Spent a torturous day on top. Broiling sun, and we make every stop. Questioned by a Mountie at Vegreville. Arrived in Vermilion at 6 p.m. Asking the station agent how to get to Len Yarwood's place. 14 miles straight across the prairie. No transportation whatsoever. 14 miles across the prairie, and we'll have to walk. Starting off down the tracks, the afternoon closing down, getting dark. Well, again, for interest of brevity, I won't read it, but they find a schoolhouse, and the fire is still warm. There seems to have been a meeting there, and the trustees just left the door unlocked. They were out west here. They went in, they slept the night in a nice warm schoolhouse, and then got up and continued on to Len Yarwood's place the next day. Let's go to chapter 9 then, which is page 67. So they're at Len Yarwood's place in northern Alberta, going out after supper and working with Len in the yard, mending a latch that keeps coming loose on the gate. It's a beautiful crop, they tell me. Everybody around here is saying it's going to be such a good year. There's been no crop like this since 25. Well, it'll put us a little ahead. Buy a few things we need and save the rest. Be nice if these crops keep coming like this, but there's bound to be a year sometime in the future when the yield is a little thin. Hard to sleep some nights with worry. Still, I'm ever so glad I made the move out here. So the story of Len Yarwood does develop in the novel, but I'll just mention that and leave it. Uh, Interesting that the latch and the gate keeps coming loose. I like to slip these little factual items in. But, does the gate always stay closed when you think it will? Will the crops always be good when you hope they will? More about Len Yarwood, but not necessarily reading it today. And then 73, here's a really nice incident. I put it together from words of my dad in the diary, words of Charlie in the interview I did with him, and then a few of my own words. Heading back home to Len's place, riding home about midnight across the prairie. Glad to have the sheepskin coats. Suddenly, a burst of color. There it is. The northern lights. A sight which is out of this world. All the colors of the rainbow meeting in an arch in the middle of the sky, lighting up the entire countryside as far as the eye can see. We stop the horses and marvel. Cold as the devil, but what a sight! You never see them in Ontario. Colder and colder as we're riding home, all the way home beneath that sky. Such a sight as I never imagined. Absolutely magnificent. Wonder what the horses are thinking as they plod along. So, uh, hard work out west and not much money, but some beautiful episodes, I guess, as life goes on. And life's made up of that, eh? Bubbles of sunshine, bubbles of rain. I use that phrase elsewhere in the novel, or have my dad use that phrase as well. And then that bubble, the sunshine bubble bursts, and you have a bubble of rain. The rain bubble bursts, and a bubble of sunshine. So it's just an interesting way to pattern these events. And now we move on to chapter 11, which is page 83. Taken on by the Cullums. Now, these are actual people and their descendants, 1932, and their descendants, I assume, are still farming in Saskatchewan. But here it is. Taken on by the Cullums, Ainsley and May, Ivan and Orla. Father, mother, son, and little girl. And a hired man named Tom who looks after the teams. It's a pretty good setup here. 1,200 acres of land and a real nice spread. 3 full meals and all you can eat. A bedroom right in the house for Charlie and me. Looks like it's going to be all right. $2 a day and bed and board. All you get is your meals on a day that it rains. That's fair enough, I'd say. We heard some terrible stories from guys on the trains about how you get treated on some of the farms. We're lucky they're taking us on. All Charlie doesn't like is the constant wind. So they were well treated. They were. This is all true, of course. They were housed in the farmhouse. They became part of the family and so on, and they were working, hard work. But $2 a day was pretty good money at that time. My dad really liked it out west, but he had, an anchor here in Ontario, where I live now, and was born. And my dad got married and had 3 kids and so on. So he didn't go back out west, but he really liked it. Charlie thought, the wind was kind of a bother, and where was the green grass and the water and so on, the rivers and the apples. He really liked Ontario apples, so that's kind of interesting. That plays back and forth through the novel as well. The West, not versus the East, but the West has advantages and maybe disadvantages. The East has advantages and disadvantages. When I went out West, people said, "Well, who'd want to live in Ontario? The traffic, uh, the number of people, and the humidity." So I thought, well, okay, but we do have some attractive things in Ontario too. Never an argument, just an interesting discussion. So let's move on to 89. So work, driving a binder with a 4-horse team. The team stopping and pulling the binder clear around. Charlie asking me what's going on, but I don't know. Checking the harness to see what's gone wrong. Charlie shouting and pointing at the horizon. A big black cloud rolling towards us, grabbing some sheaves and making a pile. the soil coming in like a snowstorm, every sheaf getting blasted away, turning our backs and lying down and covering our heads. Icy wind and a curtain of black, and then it's gone. Mud on our faces and in our ears, shirts filled up with pads of mud, wiping our eyes and checking the horses, their fur plugged with gumbo, and lines down the side of their faces where the tears ran down. So, of course, the Dust Bowl, we think of Oklahoma with the Dust Bowl, the breaking of the sod and then these dry summers, and then the wind just lifts the soil and blows it away. But here's Saskatchewan with something very, very similar. Let's go to chapter 13 then. Page 103. And again, still working on the Cullum farm in Saskatchewan. Long, long days of hard work. Page 103. Half sleeping on the wagon as we jog along the path. A lantern on a pole is the only light. 3 miles to go before we get to the site today. Tom, the old fella, telling me all about his team. Loves these horses as if they're his own. 6 teams in the field and 2 for hauling grain. Charlie on a wagon a few teams back. Everything covered in dew. Boots and pant legs will get soaking wet as soon as we start the work. They'll dry out when the sun heats up, and we'll be okay. So it's interesting to be able to write novels where everything isn't what you'd call action. I got this from Proust's idea of iterative action, meaning we repeat things. And if you're working on a farm in Saskatchewan, you get up every day and basically repeat the same action, working in the field, but with variations. So here's just basically the routine of getting up in the morning and going out to the fields in order to start work. It's a repeat, but it's a little different every day. 104. Getting worried about my gloves. Hole in the left middle finger. Hope Tom remembered to bring extra gloves today. Pretty hard on this whole finger if he forgot. Sun comes up of a sudden out here. Sunrise only lasts a few seconds. Not like at home. No sense closing my eyes at all. Every rut just jars them open. Soon be pulling into the field, sliding down and getting to work. Some days I'd like to just sit on this wagon and never get off. So exhausting work, but they were hard workers and glad to have the work. It's just that we're all of us human. And sometimes we think, gee, this is a real grind. Uh, okay, chapter 15, page 113. Again, leaving an awful lot out. It's a 50,000 word novel, but just picking certain items to give the flavor. 113. Getting a sense that she's coming to an end. A dark morning and threatening rain. Stronger winds than we've ever had before, making it so hard to work that we quit at 3 o'clock. A man in a rack completely over. The loads are like sails as they catch the wind. Nobody hurt, but Mr. Cullum says it's too windy to work. Everybody says that it won't be long before there's snow. So this is October, getting late in the year. Then we go to 117 for another one I picked out. Setting the straw stacks on fire to mark the end of the harvest. At last, the threshing is done. Ride like the wind on horseback. Hold the torch at the end of your arm. Be careful not to singe your horse as you swing your arm. Ride from haystack to haystack. Go like the devil and set 'em on fire. Acres and acres of blazing straw. Blazing stacks of fire as far as the eye can see. Burning brightly against the night sky. Dotted all across the fields. A ribbon of fire. Then I'm going to skip chapter 16. More incidents there of farm work. Still in Saskatchewan, still working on the Cullum farm. But here's the last chapter, getting ready to leave and then going back again as a hobo, 2 hobos, Charlie and my dad on the CPR, to Toronto and, across Alberta. Well, they're in Saskatchewan, so Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Northern Ontario, down to Toronto, and then basically walking home, hitchhiking, walking home. So, okay, still there in Saskatchewan. Here it is, October. Chapter 17, page 127. A perfect October morning, a heavy frost on the ground, atmosphere exceptionally clear, disking with the 8-horse team all morning and afternoon, packing the saddle and the suitcase for shipping to the east, $200 tied up in my bundle, a ride to the station at 9 p.m., saying goodbye and thanks to the Cullums, Ainsley and May. waiting for the midnight train, choosing the hopper of a combine, Charlie and me both clambering in, Ivan squeezing in alongside us. The metal as cold as the devil, like being in the tower of a submarine. That was my dad's description of that, the cold metal of that piece of farm machinery. So Ainsley and May were the Cullums, as I say, their descendants presumably are still farming in Saskatchewan. These are actual names. Ivan, the boy, he was born out west, but he had relatives in the east because his parents had come from Ontario. So he came back. He was about 16 or so, teenager, and my dad and Charlie showed him around Ontario. Took him to Detroit, Michigan, where my dad's brother and sister in their 20s had jobs. Took him to Niagara Falls and took him to the Royal York Hotel in Toronto to a dance and I think to a football game at Varsity Stadium, Toronto. And then he saw his relatives, and then later he went back. So that's Ivan Cullum, the boy. 120, 134, page 134. I just picked the very last item. Uh, Again, lots of items being left out here. So this is the last item in the whole novel, the last action section as well. On the road at 6:30, sun coming up as we walk along, 10 miles just to get to Waterdown. So Toronto, Waterdown, Paris, then they're going to St. Thomas, my hometown and my dad's hometown, where he and Charlie and Ivan are headed. Still a long, long way from home. Not one car will give us a lift for even a mile. Paying for a bus to take us to Paris. Just one dime between us for a phone call, so we set out to walk. Well, they had $200, but hey, not going to spend it. My feet can't hold out much longer. Soles of my feet feel like they're raw. Sunny day though. Breeze is nice. Apple orchards on either side. Like to lie down here and relax for the rest of my life. Hey, wait a second. Ivan, look, it's this Ken. My God, I hope it is. Looks like it from a distance. Looks like a 27 Chev. Better drop this pack and get out on the highway and flag him down. If it's not him, I'll only be good for a few more miles. Ivan wouldn't know Ken to see him, but I'm sure gonna know. Standing out in the middle of the pavement and waving my arms. That's how I chose to end the novel. Now, Ken is my dad's brother, and it surprised me in a way to realize my dad had a 27 Chev. This is 1932. It's only a 5-year-old car. But he was a young single man. His mother had been a widow in 1917, or had been widowed in 1917 when my grandfather, my dad's dad, died in a railway accident. Tough time. She had 5 young children. By 1932, though, her 5 young children were all out, and a couple of them had full-time work in Detroit, and my dad had part-time work. So it's interesting. And maybe before 1929, he squeezed in the good years and bought a 27 Chev. Like I didn't get to ask him about that as a detail. How'd you have such a new car in the Depression? But I think that's what happened. A young man, his mother was okay, contributing to the household, but still earning good money and buying a 27 Chev. So here in 1932, he leaves a 27 Chev home and goes on the hobo. But it's fascinating when you look at these historical eras in detail. You see all kinds of interesting sort of wrinkles in our very simplistic picture of everybody poor, everybody broke, and so on. But just a case that there wasn't the incoming money constantly. You might have had a 27 Chev, but did you have enough money to keep putting gas in it and so on? So I'll stop there, but I have a few things to say as a conclusion in a moment. So, as a conclusion to this reading of some of the action sections, the action thoughts of the novel, if you go to my website, which is johnpassfield.ca, all one word, JOHNPASSFIELD, there's a notebook and a journal which I wrote as I was writing this novel, writing and polishing. And so if you just go up to notebooks at the top, click on that, and go down to the icon of the novel, you'll get a whole book for free. I'm not asking for money. I'm making this available. And it's my notebook. And it starts when I think, hey, I could write a novel based on my dad's novel. And all the way through till I have a full rough draft, 50,000 words almost. And then there's another one. If you go to the same website, johnpassfield.ca, and you go to the top to journals, and you go down and click on that icon, then you get a full book, which is my journal, again, free. I'm making it available. And that's written while I'm polishing the novel. All kinds of topics occur to me, including an ongoing topic with me is how to write a novel, what kind of novel, what is a novel, and so on. But also about my dad and out west and family and all these other topics that occur to me. So I just write while I'm polishing. So here's a passage I'd like to read, which is from my journal as part of a conclusion. Everyone needs a personal mythology. The main character, who is my dad at 23 years old, does not have one yet, but he is in the process of forming one. A mythology is an idea pattern into which all pertinent information can be fitted. In the process of turning from uninterpreted information to interpreted information, an item of information becomes an image. This is what Blake meant when he said that he must create his own myth or be enslaved by that of another. My dad, the main character, is in the process of taking all of the information of his life so far. These are the thoughts that he goes through while he's working. The information of the trip to the west of Canada in the summer of 1932, images about a gate staying locked or coming open and everything you value going on you, crop failures and so on, and whatever hopeful possibilities and dreaded fears he has for the future, and building a myth, a personal idea pattern into which he can interpret this loose bag of information so that it will have meaning as elements of supporting imagery in an idea pattern or an objective correlative of his entire life, past, present, and future. So, what is life all about? Well, if I review my life, I'll have a better idea. If I think about significant moments, that will help me interpret all the moments of my life. So the book, I'll just hold it up again, is Cyril Passfield Out West, a novel by John Passfield. It's available on Amazon for sale. Uh, if you go to rocksmillspress.com, that's my publisher's website. The book is available there to buy, and there's more information. rocksmillspress.com for the publisher. My website, once again, is johnpassfield.ca. 2 free books there to access, a planning notebook and a journal. And lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.